Welcome to the Blue Security Podcast, a weekly podcast for information security defenders, where we bring you discussions on best practices, tools, and implementation for enterprise security. Now, here are your hosts for today's show, Andy Jha and Adam Brewer.
Welcome to another episode of the Blue Security Podcast. I'm Andy, your host.
I'm Adam, your co-host.
This week we have a couple of articles that I found interesting that I wanted to talk about. We're going to start with the new iPhone 17. So this was just announced. There's been some news about it, but one of the things that was really interesting is that there's a specific upgrade to the security of the iPhone 17 that some folks in the information security realm might want to know about. So Apple announced that along with the iPhone 17, there's going to be something called a memory integrity enforcement, which is the industry's first comprehensive always-on memory safety protection covering key attack surfaces, including the kernel and over 70 user-land processes. And it's built on the enhanced memory tagging extension and supported by secure typed allocators and tag confidentiality protections. So it's kind of similar to Microsoft's introduction of memory integrity securities in Windows 11, like the virtualization-based protection of code integrity. But the way it's implemented is actually really interesting. So this is available for the new A19 and A19 Pro chips that are in the iPhone 17, and they have this enhanced security. But also, Apple is adding some memory safety changes for older hardware that don't support the memory tagging features. In the testing, Apple has said that there's virtually zero CPU cost for this protection. And the feature works both on a hardware level and software level, basically instantly terminating any application that attempts to access memory that it shouldn't. So why this is important is because there's a whole spyware industry that produces exploits tools like Pegasus, which we've talked about before on the podcast, where they use these tools to hack the targeted devices. And Pegasus specifically can remotely access a device by exploiting memory allocation flaws and timing gaps. And then it extracts sensitive data like your messages, photos, credentials. And what memory integrity enforcement does is it prevents this by tightly controlling that memory access. Each block of memory is labeled and then monitored. If it detects that an app on the phone is attempting unauthorized access, it immediately terminates that app. So it's real-time enforcement so that even the sophisticated malware cannot operate undetected. For the most part, for everyday users, it means stronger privacy. But really for high-profile individuals, politicians, journalists, activists, corporate executives, this makes it much more difficult to hack an iPhone. So overall, it's a really great feature. It's turned on by default. You don't have to even think about it. There is a stack within the software that for developers to enable this type of protection for their app. So, if you're a developer, definitely pay attention to that. But overall, this, is a great feature that is available in the new iPhone 17.
This is Apple at its best. And credit where credit is due, Apple is really good at security. There was this perception for the longest time that Apple was only good at security by obscurity. No one tried to hack the Mac, therefore the Mac had good security. And that was never really true. Mac OS was built on a Unix foundation and was built on really some of the most brilliant operating systems ever created, the Next Step line, which is, I don't want to get off topic, but it's just such an incredible story that, Steve Jobs gets exiled from Apple, goes and founds his Next Computer. Next Computer invents the Cube, never sells. The Next Station never sells. But the operating system developed by Avi Tevanian and the whole crew over there was so next level. And if you want to kill some time, go watch some of these Next Step introductions on YouTube. They're literally off of old VHS copies, but you put yourself in the mindset, these are from 1988, 1989. And you think of what IBM PCs look like at the time, even what the Mac looked like at the time. Most Macs were still black and white. It is the most incredible demo you'll ever see with multimedia, network connectivity, email, multitasking. It's unbelievable. And Next Step, Apple needed an operating system in the late 90s. They acquired Next Step. Next Step became Mac OS 10, which became the foundation for iOS. And so the history of it dates all the way back to literally the mid 1980s and Next Step, and carries all the way forward to today. Apple deserves a ton of credit for the work they've done. Just incredible. And the smartphone is the most personal of personal computers with the amount of data we have on them. And so really kudos to Apple for continuing to innovate and drive the state of the art forward in the interplay of hardware and software working together to create a hardened and secure environment. They really have done incredible work. And as I've always called out on this show, I have a very dim view of anyone who doesn't report vulnerabilities through responsible disclosure to companies like Apple. Collect that bug bounty, let it get patched for everyone, improve the state of the art of security going forward. But we know security agencies, spying agencies around the world, they want to hoard vulnerabilities. So a lot of these come from Israel, which is going to dovetail quite nicely into our next conversation. But either way, just I can't say enough about what great work Apple has done here. And this is awesome. And I know sometimes, Andy, to be fair, you were reading some of kind of Apple's marketing copy when it's like the industry's first ever comprehensive always on memory safety protection covering key attack surfaces, clearly from the Apple marketing department. But to be fair, sometimes you really have innovated. And I think that's a space where Apple has continued to innovate. They have a very dim view of people trying to hoard these vulnerabilities, break into these systems, and attack basically freedom around the world. And so ultimately, this is a great thing just for everyone. It's hardware and software working together. So it's only truly available on iPhones 17 and 17 Pro. Also iPhone Air. They're kind of trying to backport as much of this as they can where they don't have the hardware enablement, but do some of it through software. Really great stuff. We'll have the link in the show notes to The Verge. And also Apple's security research blog. There's some good details here. It's worth a review. And again, just as I always say on this show, that rising tide lifts all ships. We'll improve the state of the art in security on Android and on Windows and on Chrome OS and everywhere across our industry. Systems will get hardened based on some of the concepts here, and they will proliferate throughout the industry. So great news. Just awesome stuff.
Yeah, and before we go on to our next topic, we usually do a standard disclaimer because Adam and I both work for Microsoft. We work in our field sales. Those of you who listen to the show know that. And so we fund the show on our own dime and we do this on our own time. And so we just want to make sure that you know that sometimes our employment may color some of our commentary. It's what we know, but we usually look through the news and the things that we talk about with an academic view. This next topic specifically is about Microsoft on the issues, and it's written by Brad Smith, who is one of our corporate VPs, head of the legal arm of Microsoft.
Brad Smith is president. He's not vice. Yeah, he is president of Microsoft. Yeah.
President. Sorry.
No.
Like when we talk about, Adam, you mentioned Israel, especially when it comes to like Pegasus and a lot of the exploit tools. Israel is well known for a lot of their information security, cybersecurity capabilities. And Microsoft also has a pretty big investment in Israel when it comes to engineering efforts. If you're not familiar, a lot of our security products and engineering teams work in Israel. They're Israeli. And so, there's been a lot of news lately because of the war in Gaza and, Microsoft's investment. And then there was a Guardian article that came out where the Guardian reported that multiple individuals said that the Israeli Defense Force was using Azure for storage data for phone calls obtained through broad or mass surveillance of civilians in Gaza and the West Bank. And so Microsoft said that we were going to conduct an investigation, and this article is kind of an update from Brad Smith on that investigation. And it begins by just saying right away, and I'll quote, "I want to let you know that Microsoft has ceased and disabled a set of services to a unit within the Israeli Ministry of Defense, or IMOD." And then he goes on to say, Microsoft is not a government or country. We're a company. Just like every other company, we decide what products and services to offer to our customers. And so He talked about the Guardian article, and then based on that, Microsoft decided to do a review, and the review was conducted with some principles that are grounded in Microsoft's protection of privacy as a fundamental right. So that's what we at Microsoft believe, that privacy is key. And so first thing that Brad Smith said is that, in general, like we don't provide technology to facilitate mass surveillance of civilians. And we've applied this principle in every country around the world and insisted on it repeatedly for more than 2 decades. And second of all, he says Microsoft respects and protects the privacy of our customers. This means, among other things, that we do not access customer content in this type of investigation. So at no point in the investigation did Microsoft access the Israeli Ministry of Defense customer content. The review was focused on Microsoft's own business records, financial statements, internal documents, emails, and messaging communications, among other records. And based on that review, Microsoft found that there was some evidence to support the elements of the Guardian's report that included information relating to the Israeli Ministry of Defense consumption of Azure storage capacity in the Netherlands and the use of AI services. And the review is ongoing still. So, I think this is great because it's a unit. So it was a unit within the Israeli Ministry of Defense. That unit abused the services that were provided to them, and they were cut off from that. So, I think this is something that a lot of people had questions. There's probably a lot of other questions that we have, and maybe other people have, and he's going to continue to put out stuff because, again, this review is ongoing. But I thought that this was important and kind of a good show of how we deal with things like this when they arise.
I subscribe to Frank X. Shaw's internal mailing list, TGIF. And if you're not familiar with Mr. Shaw, he is Microsoft's chief communications officer. So his job is primarily to work with journalists and other publications that may be writing about Microsoft and help them to do their journalistic work with the best information possible. And obviously, make sure they're trying to do everything he can to position Microsoft in the best possible light. That is his job. But ultimately, journalists are going to report what they have. And so his job is to just make sure that's fair and balanced as much as possible. And he had nothing but really positive feedback to say about how The Guardian handled this story. When they first had the story and brought it together, they offered Microsoft an opportunity to comment, to review, to dispute anything. Obviously, it didn't mean they weren't going to report it, but they could say in the article, hey, Microsoft disputes some of these facts or whatever, just so it's balanced reporting, right? That's what good journalists do. And anyhow, had nothing but good things to say about them. So I just want to kind of make that point. This is what a free press does. A well-functioning free press is a benefit to democracy and to the better goals of the world everywhere. And when a company like Microsoft says privacy is a fundamental human right, and we do operate in that way, and if there's going to be mass surveillance of civilians, obviously our services, we choose not to offer that. You can go somewhere else, but we're not going to be a party to that. And so I love that this review happened, not knee-jerk reaction, because this first Guardian report came out months ago, if not many weeks ago. There was a thorough and careful review. Some of it was found to be substantiated, and action was taken. This is how stuff is supposed to work. Like, I know it's so easy to get hung up on how messed up the world is today. This is how things are supposed to work. Good journalism shines a spotlight on news that people don't want reported. And then you have an opportunity to use that reporting to make it right. And Microsoft did that. Instead of just knee-jerk rejecting it or saying it's all wrong, it's all lies, they thoughtfully said, okay, maybe there's something here. Let's go do our homework. And then let's come back and respond when we have something to share. Now, if you've ever had the opportunity to hear Brad Smith speak, Brad Smith is Microsoft's chief legal officer. He's Microsoft's president. I would vote for him for US president if he ever ran, because he is such a thoughtful, compassionate, intelligent, considerate person, great leader. He's one of those people that you hear speak and you're magnetized. You were drawn to what he is saying and sharing. And Brad Smith famously, when he first came to Microsoft, He came when Microsoft was still at odds with the United States Department of Justice on the antitrust dispute. And Brad Smith came in and presented a PowerPoint. And I've shared this before, so I apologize for repeating myself, but it's worth repeating. Shared a PowerPoint on his strategy for dealing with the antitrust. And his PowerPoint was a single slide with a single sentence. And it said, "It's time to make peace." And supposed to, Bill Gates fought everything tooth and nail. If you've ever seen his deposition videos, they do not make Bill look very good. Brad Smith came in and said, "Let's make peace, let's find a settlement, and let's move forward." And ever since then, he's one of those people, he gets called before Congress. He doesn't sit there and fight back against the senators or argue with them or tell them they don't know what they're talking about. He's very thoughtful and very measured. And a lot of it is, you're right, we need to do better. Yes, we're going to do that. We're going to change our approach. When Microsoft has been called before Congress lately, as opposed to being something that's cringeworthy, like so many of these are, Zuckerberg comes to mind, it's really something that I've been very proud of, in all honesty, and how he has comported himself in the public spotlight. So ultimately, again, I just said, this is how everything is supposed to function. And I love the fact that we didn't have to go view the Ministry of Defense's data and files. We did not cross that line. We're able to triangulate this through other ways. Maybe there are people at Microsoft who had email communications where they had outright said, "Yeah, this is what we're doing. Can you help us design an Azure architecture for it?" And we were able to find those emails that we had communicated, because that's definitely our business, and determine that. I don't know how we didn't share those details, but again, overall, this is the system working as intended, and I think it's a positive outcome. And you don't really have to stake a position on the broader conflict here between Israel and the Palestinians and the Gaza Strip and everything else. You don't have to take a position on this to say, hey, private companies are allowed to set their terms of service and they're allowed to enforce them. And can you do that in a thoughtful and considerate way? And that all happened here. And that all started because journalists did their job. And so to me, that all is positive outcome.
All right. So for our final story, there have been quite a few NPM package attacks or supply chain attacks over the last month or so. The latest one, the security researchers identified that there were about 187 NPM packages compromised in a supply chain attack with a malicious self-propagating payload to infect other packages. So NPM stands for Node Package Manager. If you're not familiar with that, it's the default package manager for JavaScript runtime environment Node.js. And it's a crucial tool for JavaScript developers because it allows them to share and manage code packages efficiently. It's a critical tool. The worm style campaign was dubbed Shai Halud, which as a nerd, I find really fun, because if you're not familiar, Shai Halud is the sandworm. It's the Fremen term for the sandworm on Arrakis in Dune. And so, it's a worm. So they named it Shai Halud, which was kind of funny. But it started in September, and it compromised a NPM package called @control, like CTRL/tinycolor, which received about 2 million weekly downloads. And then since then, the campaign expanded significantly and included packages that were published under CrowdStrike's NPM namespace. So when CrowdStrike was asked about this, they replied, and I'll quote them because it's their official response here. After detecting several malicious Node Package Manager packages in the public NPM registry, a third-party open source repository, we swiftly removed them and proactively rotated our keys in public registry. These packages are not used in the Falcon sensor. The platform is not impacted, and the customers remain protected. We're working with NPM and conducting a thorough investigation. So that's good to know. The worm used something called TruffleHog, which is a legitimate secret scanner that's used by developers and security professionals to find accidentally leaked sensitive information like API keys, passwords, and tokens within code repositories. And so used that to try to steal secrets as this worm was propagating. And again, this just comes a few weeks after this other NPM supply chain attack called NX Singularity that resulted in the exposure of over 2,000 accounts, 2,200 repositories. And that one was really interesting because it stood out mainly because the credential stealer that was used to install command line tools for artificial intelligence platforms like Claude, Q, and Gemini was used to search and harvest sensitive credentials and secrets using LLM prompts. So as a result of all of these, like this was just kind of one right after another, all of these different NPM supply chain attacks and these repositories that were like housed within GitHub. GitHub announced some major changes to address token abuse and self-replicating malware. They're making some changes to authentication and publishing options in the near future. So in the near future, you're only going to be able to do local publishing with two-factor authentication. That'll be required. Granular tokens will have a limited lifespan of 7 days, and you have to use trusted publishing, which is an authentication method that builds on the existing OpenID Connect standard for user infrastructure publishing to public package repositories. And then they're also doing a few things to support the hardening of the NPM ecosystem, like deprecating legacy classic tokens, deprecating time-based one-time password 2FA, migrating users to FIDO-based 2FA, limiting granular tokens with publishing permissions to shorter expiration, setting publishing access to disallow tokens by default, and encouraging the usage of trusted publishers or 2FA enforced local publishing, removing the option to bypass 2FA for local package publishing, and expanding eligible providers for trusted publishing. And they realized, and GitHub is also a company that's owned by Microsoft. So if I say we, it's just it's part of Microsoft. But they realized that changes are going to be, they can be impactful for a lot of these things if you already have ongoing workflows that use some of these different tokens or whatnot. And so these changes are going to roll out gradually, but they are going to roll out. And so some of the things that NPM maintainers can do now is start using NPM trusted publishing instead of tokens. Strengthen your publishing settings on your accounts, your org, and your packages to require 2FA for any writes and publishing actions. And then when you're configuring two-factor auth, use WebAuthn instead of the TOTP, the time-based one-time passwords. So a lot of good stuff here. I said a lot, so Adam, you'll have to give your thoughts. But yeah, I mean, there's been these NPM package attacks. Like I said, it just kind of came fairly sudden over the last month or so, a couple of high visibility ones, and then GitHub took action right away, started making changes to its authentication platform. So all good stuff here, especially if you're pay attention if you are a JavaScript developer and use NPM.
GitHub is owned by Microsoft. However, GitHub still operates completely independently. It is not part of the Microsoft machine. Most GitHub users are still issued Macs. They still use Slack. They're on a pretty different stack than the rest of Microsoft. They are minimally integrated, as we call it, just like LinkedIn for that matter. Also minimally integrated, still a very distinct company. So yes, but kind of not we, right? The folks over at GitHub are our friends and yes, our colleagues theoretically, but also doing their own thing. I mean, this is ultimately bad, but good. It's always interesting, all the security changes that you all now have the buy-in to make when you've had a security incident. And you always are like, oh, I wonder how many of those were already in the works. And now this accelerates the timeline. Obviously interesting to me that time-based one-time passwords are being deprecated. Like to point that out. If you're a listener of the show, if you're still using any sort of one-time password, you're sending people an SMS, you're calling them on the phone. Stop. Don't do that. Migrate to these more secure methods. That's a great thing. Overall, I don't think there's a lot here. I saw some of the headlines really dug in on CrowdStrike being impacted. And ultimately, it was kind of a nothing burger there, too. I mean, believe me, I would love to dunk on CrowdStrike. It's one of my favorite things in the world, but I think it really is a nothing burger there. So a clever attack for sure. Mm-hmm. And it sounds like we're making the adjustments as cybersecurity professionals do to continue the cat and mouse game. So there'll be some changes moving forward, and it seems like they're all pretty positive. And while these roll out, you can basically implement them on your own. Now you can require 2FA for any written and publication actions. You can use more secure 2FA methods now, those sorts of things. So some good stuff here. And again, GitHub, the benefit of GitHub being such a central and critical piece of infrastructure nowadays is that they have the visibility into these. They can correlate them, and then they can make changes relatively quickly and get the buy-in to do them. And for the most part, when GitHub makes changes like this, it truly is that rising tide lifting all ships, where everyone gets more secure as a result of these. Really positive changes. I don't think I have a lot more commentary here, but again, bad that the attack happened, and supply chain attacks are going to continue to be interesting because I think there is some ongoing weakness there and ways to have broad impact. But at the same time, we can make security changes that have broad impact as well and broadly harden the world. So the cat and mouse game continues. What else is new?
All right. Well, that is our episode for this week. Thanks for watching and listening. As always, our contact information will be in the show notes, along with the links that we used to research and talk about for this episode. If you have any topics you want us to talk about or questions, comments, our emails will be in the show notes as well. Thanks. We'll talk to you guys next week.
Thank you for listening to the Blue Security Podcast. Please check out the show notes, catch up on episodes you may have missed, and subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. Find Andy on Twitter @AJaw0 and Adam @AJ Brewer. See you at our next episode.